you get absorbed in and you are Sonic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to No Repeat, the podcast where we pick 3 songs every week with no repeats and no do-overs to create the perfect drive time radio station for all your commuting needs. I'm Taylor Olmstead and I'm joined by my fellow shock jocks, Tyler Reed.
That's right, folks. And don't you ever forget, this is not an anime podcast, so don't you ever come here looking for your hot takes on Beastars.
And the Mad Dog himself, Sean Evans.
Hot take, Valentine's Day, which it is today, because we're recording this on Valentine's Day, is basically like brunch, but served for dinner.
And as we all know, those keeping track at home,
Sean hates brunch.
Sean hates brunch.
Right, overpriced, underserved, and you can't get it anywhere. Don't ask me. Don't ask me why.
Just make a big egg at home. You got this.
See, I tried to do a topical intro, and you two just took us completely off the road. Tyler, what is our challenge this week?
This week, you're trying to find the perfect song for open road driving. Submitted by Sarah. Is there a proper way we should introduce Sarah? And if you want to submit your own challenge, you can DM us, add us. We're trying to do a little bit more posting on the socials, so you have an opportunity also to comment or like there at No Repeat Pod. Or you can always send us an email at norepeatpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
So, Sean, since this challenge came in from your lovely wife, you want to start us off first? Talk about what open road driving is for the two of you in your typical day-to-day life?
Oh, okay. Well, we don't anymore. I can speak for myself, really, when I say that. Okay, so this must have been, like, in one of our early episodes, maybe, like, in the first 20, we did driving on the highway, or it was like a more
I think it was just like long drives was what it was.
Does that make sense? Is that something along those like? Yeah. And we talked about that, and then we kind of feel like we've had 100 episodes of Billy Joe where we've kind of said, like, what's the distinction? Should we keep this on here? And we always did, and finally it was time to do it. And so I was thinking about this and thinking about what the distinction is between having just like open road and on the road or just driving songs, because it seems like kind of a gray area after a while, you know, like it could be anything. And for me, I was trying to think of songs that were open road driving is like a lonely driving. Like it might not be like on a super highway, but it reminds me of when I think of open road driving, like one of those scenes where you're driving through Death Valley or something, or that huge, like, a road and there's just, like, no other cars around, right? Like, it's kind of the closest you could probably get to anarchy. You know, like, there are, like, bounds. You can't do whatever you want because you are physically constrained by things. But if you wanted to go 150, there's no one who can stop you. If you wanted to reverse, you just want to slam on the brakes or just stop and go, like, 5 miles an hour, or you know, ghost ride and get up on the hood of your car while you're driving it. Like, there's nobody who can say anything to you because you're on the open road. So that's kind of where I was going for. It's not, I didn't go for, like, the madness of the open road as much as I went for the reflections that I've had in the times that I've been in open road. Because most of those times I feel like have been actually probably more in, like, undergraduate or going from Akron to OU. Because when you go down 77 at night, there can be times where you're just like in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. There's like nothing around you. So we'll talk about that more when I talk about my song, but that's kind of the energy that I was going for, was a contemplative road meditation state that I feel you can get in the safety of being on the open road, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think I was pretty similar. I have driven I-75 back and forth between Georgia and Ohio more times than I can count at this point, and crisscrossed a lot of Appalachia in between there. And I've done a little bit of driving on the West Coast. I drove a big chunk of Northern California a couple summers ago. And I feel like for me, you know, I didn't want to go the reflective route on this challenge because when we did our long drives challenge, I kind of did that with my Modest Mouse pick. So I wanted to kind of capture that exuberance that you were talking about, that like you're all alone out there and you can kind of do anything. And in particular, I was thinking about like, what are my favorite times of open road driving? And for me, it's like you said, not usually on a big like interstate highway. I love being out on like a state route or a county road somewhere when there's nobody around and you just like get the whole run of the road, but it's not as tame as an interstate. So you still got to kind of pay attention, but you've got, you know, your rolling hills and your big arcing turns and stuff that makes you really enjoy driving. And when I used to drive a tiny little manual hatchback, it was so fun to just rip through the hills of Appalachia and like downshift through the turns and really like take advantage of driving a small car that rode low to the ground. And so I wanted a song that kind of captured that feeling of like, this is the joy of driving and the fun of being like out on your own by yourself in the car, just like really feeling that moment and enjoying the motion of it. Because I feel like the last driving challenge I went to cerebral, and I wanted to kind of, you know, talk about engines and gas and macho stuff. Butch it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think we all kind of were like, okay, so we did this challenge, but this is not the same challenge. It's just not. It's not.
It's not. It's not. Because a long drive, you're going to have some spots of traffic. You're going to have to like adjust and do the rubber banding thing. And there's stops and everything. Open road could just be you're going out for a Saturday afternoon drive for a couple hours. And you're not going anywhere in particular.
Right. And so, yeah. And so the way that I mean, we're basically all just saying the same thing. But what I was thinking about, I was like thinking about the intentionality of what I'm doing. Whereas I think, to be fair, this was at the very start of the podcast, in which we were just kind of like, whatever happens, happens. And so my strategy was like a long song that I've been listening to a lot. So I feel like I sort of wasn't really in this space where I was like kind of choosing songs in the same way as I do now. And so, I think I almost was trying to highlight the mundanity of having to go that distance in the first challenge of just saying a long drive, because I feel like the way that's worded makes it seem like, oh, it's like kind of like arduous, you know, it's like it's not something you want to do, and so I was kind of like, this is helping me pass the time, and so what I was thinking about this time was I was like, okay, so, you know, sort of like our Pacific Northwest Rocky Beach challenge. I'm like, well, why am I going out there? You know, or why am I long driving? And so I was like, well, I feel like sometimes driving for me really gives me a lot of time to reflect. You know, I feel like also similar, like almost like a shower. You feel almost like sort of out of time, out of place. You feel like in your own sort of like void, a bubble, where you can kind of sort of like reflect on things. And so I think what I wanted to do is I wanted the song that was like, I wouldn't necessarily listen to, well, I wanted to find like songs that were maybe a little bit more long form, kind of like last time. But I was like, you know, I feel like sometimes you get in the car, not every song's going to be super great. You know, like you're driving a couple minutes down the road, like you're not trying to listen to like an epic, you know, like, so like what song that's like, you can kind of really digest a little bit more of, you can kind of like really start to think on and reflect about, you know, so that's kind of where I was at. I was just kind of trying to find a song that I feel like allowed my mind to wander and opened me up to possibilities.
What is the best open road drive you guys have ever done? Or the best one in recent memory, we'll say.
Oh my god, have I not driven that much recently? I mean, I really have not. I mean,
we've had a pandemic, so
I mean, probably one of the better drives in general was definitely driving to Cleveland when the new Carly Rae Jepsen album came out. I feel like we were doing, this podcast was like in its infancy, I'm pretty sure, when I went down there too. That was probably like one of the few times I've driven that far and it was not for like work at the time. So, I mean, like getting able to just like sort of like crush an album so many times back to back, which is versus the time when I went to like a Smash tournament where I didn't get to see Sean. Sorry, Sean. And we drove overnight, and that we were both like falling asleep at the wheel. That was a really bad long drive, like 3 a.m. and like I had to stop in Columbus and get some great coffee. And I was like, I'm not gonna make it through this.
I don't know if I have like an open road driving. Spoiler alert, I don't really like driving. not a big fan of it.
It's a little wasteful. It's okay. I understand. Time consuming.
I do have like open road moments. Like I think probably one of the last times that I really, really liked it was probably when I was living in Athens the summer after I graduated, or maybe the fall after I graduated from graduate school. And like I was doing a lot of road running. And you could, in Athens County, you can kind of, once you get out of Athens and you get onto the country roads, if you're riding your bike or something like that, or you're running, you basically can run on the road because there's no sidewalks. It's all country roads. And there's like not much traffic at all. So you can really like get into the zone in those places. And I feel like I had like my little shuffle on. I probably had like a playlist that just recycled over and over and over. Yeah, that was probably like one of the last ones. I did do like a 50-mile bike ride this summer where I kind of got in the zone for a little bit, but it wasn't as euphoric as any of the times that I can remember in Athens, just because it's not. Spoiler alert, I don't think the DC suburbs are that pretty, so.
Yeah, I can agree with you there, having visited and ridden in traffic with you there. Friend of the show, Jack Van Kuren, had his wedding last summer kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Not kind of. Love you, Jack. Your wedding was in the middle of nowhere. It was, I would say, more than a slight inconvenience to get there, but it ended up being kind of great doing the drive because I drove from Atlanta up to my parents' house in Cincinnati, stayed a night with them, and then drove the 4 hours out to this remote location where Jack's wedding was. And the last 2 hours of that drive, really the last hour, was just like windy, hilly country roads, nobody around. And it was awesome. It was the kind of driving that like I remember from when I was younger and was like driving out to Athens County to go to college or driving out to my grandpa's farm, like just true, like the road and another car every 20 or 30 minutes kind of driving. And it was really cool. I hadn't done that in a long time. And after being locked inside because of the pandemic for a year and a half, to drive like that was really kind of liberating. And it was really nice. The 7 hours back and forth from Atlanta to Cincinnati before and after that wedding, less fun, but that was kind of my own fault. So I think since I'm the odd man out in terms of approach this week, I should probably go first. So this week I chose Ramble On by Led Zeppelin. It's hard to believe that we've done 171 episodes of this show, and this is the first Led Zeppelin song. I don't know how we made it this far. The rock and pop culture critic, Chuck Klosterman, has frequently said that every male born in North America after 1950 goes through a period in their life that he calls the Led Zeppelin phase, where they honestly in their heart believe that no band has ever been or will ever be as good as Led Zeppelin. And the fun part about the Zeppelin phase is that it lasts an indeterminate amount of time, and for some men, it just goes on forever. The three of us are definitely not still in our Zeppelin phase, but I look back on my Zeppelin phase fondly, and Ramble On is one of the songs that I fell for hard in my Zeppelin phase. I loved the hard blues Zeppelin, where you can still hear where they're coming from, but it's got the experimental stuff, it's got that big Jimmy Page guitar to it, and those John Bonham drums that just, I mean, man, they're loud. And I think Ramble On is such a great example of that. You know, it has those acoustic verses, but that hook and that riff are so iconic. Like, you could hear that guitar part anywhere and you immediately know what song it is. And it feels like driving out in the country to me. It's like there are times when you're going a little bit slower, there are times when you're going a little bit faster, but you better believe you got the windows all the way down. And when Robert Plant starts screaming Ramble On, you're screaming right out the windows with him. because there's nobody there to see you. You're out on the open road. They don't have to hear you not hitting those notes, because unless you're that little kid from Greta Van Fleet, you're not going to hit those notes. And that's fine. Ain't nobody listening. You're out there. The wind is behind you. You can dream that you have that ridiculous fringe coat that he used to wear, and you're reliving your Zeppelin phase. And that's where this song takes me every time I hear it.
You know, Taylor, I'm really shocked that you didn't mention I think the funniest part about this whole song is that it's like also like a Lord of the Rings like fan song, which is the biggest story about going on a journey. Is
Led Zeppelin famously loved Lord of the Rings and wrote about it in multiple songs, and this was one of the earliest ones, yes.
Listen, there was only one fantasy story in the 1970s, and it was Lord of the Rings. It was a story about Frodo going on a big adventure.
I guess they did a couple of Arthurian legend songs too, but there were a lot of Lord of the Rings songs.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like perfect. Like you could not do it today. You could not do it. And it's just so goofy.
Nobody would take it seriously.
It is absolutely perfect in that way. Anyway, I feel like you also, the second thing you did note on is that this bass is boogieing. This is some good bass.
No, I feel
not
like
that Zeppelin. Go ahead.
The real heads know that the bass is one of the best things in Led Zeppelin.
You know, I don't know if I would be able to identify the specific songs would be talking about, but I do feel like, yeah, of course they have good bass, but I feel like you really gotta have. Sometimes you gotta have the good headset for that. But I feel like this is a very bass forward song, in particular, I would say. But I mean, it's just good. Like it's such a character in this song, and I feel like I've really gotten into bass. I feel like I've always been a little bit of a bass fan, but I feel like sometimes it's just hard to that people don't really mix it in a way that like it really pulls it out. But yeah, anyway, I mean, this is like just a crisp, clean little song. I mean, it's almost 5 minutes, but it does not feel like that. You feel like you're going on a journey, and it is a ride the whole time. You're like, I'm entertained. I feel like we've had a few episodes back to back where like, God, this song's only 3 minutes. I feel like it went on forever. But this is the exact opposite. I feel like the song doesn't go on long enough. But yeah, I mean, what else can you say? It's Zeppelin. I'm glad it's on here. You know, somehow it wasn't Stairway, wasn't Kashmir, but you know, this is probably in the top cut. This is probably how much of a top cut? Don't talk about it. We'll save it for the after show.
I think Zeppelin 2 is the best album. Don't at me.
All right, well, at some point, if people want that content, they want to have us debate the best Zeppelin albums, we can do that. But yeah, I think the song also just sounds like joy, sounds like fun, and I think it would be great for a nice summer drive. Perfect.
I feel like this is a song that Dave Matthews rips off on every song of every album he's ever made.
Yes. Go off, King.
I'll just leave it at that. I know we probably lost like 4 or 5 people just from me saying that. But no, I like this song.
Just crash into them, Sean. Just crash into them.
Okay, we have to talk about this song a little bit. I think finally of my Zeppelin phase because it's kind of like it was one of the first albums that I learned how to play drums to. I don't know if it was Zeppelin 2 or which Zeppelin it was, but John Bonham is like an iconic drummer, so every drummer learns how to play John Bonham at some point in time. And I think that the panning on this song is really nicely done, especially at the end. I don't know if it was like remastered or what, but I feel like that's what Zeppelin was kind of, if I recall, most of Zeppelin that I remember it was always fun to listen to Zeppelin on headphones or listen to them in the car because there was groundbreaking engineering happening at the time, probably, that nowadays seems kind of like, oh great, you did it, you know, but it's cool to listen to. Yeah, this is a good open road driving song. It kind of reminds me of all the classic rock songs that I'll have for B-sides when we get to that point. But
real quick, when was our Zeppelin phase? When was your Zeppelin phase? Let's go.
It was early middle school, so I was probably between 12 and 14. And my dad didn't have any Zeppelin in the house, but through his like Pink Floyd and Beatles and Doors and stuff, I found Zeppelin at the library and progressively checked out all of their CDs and ripped them to my iPod.
Probably
No, God.
probably 6th grade too, like 6th grade and 7th grade. 'Cause I just had the CD and I think I just played in my Walkman over and over. This like little backpack, I'd put my Walkman in my little backpack and ride my bike around the neighborhood and just listen to Led Zeppelin. And
Middle school for everyone, because my friend Brad, submitter of episodes to the show, requested almost every single day of at middle school band. He's like, we should play Stairway to Heaven, and my band director was like, no, and just every day. But toward like the end of the year, he found a copy of it and we played it, and it was probably a train wreck for everyone involved, but it was so cool to play Little Zeppelin on the trumpet. And then, of course, my dad just sort of like injected classic rock into my veins, and he rebought a bunch of CDs, so that also helped too. But yeah, I feel like the mystique of Zeppelin was through my friend Brad, who always was wearing that Zeppelin shirt, which is so iconic and so evocative. It's just Icarus, I know.
it's fun to go into Free People today with my wife and see like all the 70s bands shirts, and there's like middle schoolers that are wearing them, and I'm just like, oh, it's full circle for me now. Like, I hope that you're actually listening to Stone Temple Pilots, because that's a good band.
I want to quote at length from Chuck Klosterman's essay on the band to close out this section of the show. He says, "They sound sexy and sexist and sexless. They sound dark but stoned. They sound smart but dumb. They seem older than you, but just barely. Led Zeppelin sounds the way a cool guy acts. Or more specifically, Led Zeppelin sounds like a certain kind of cool guy. They sound like the kind of cool guy every man vaguely thinks he has the potential to be, if just a few things about the world were somehow different. And the experience this creates is unique to Led Zeppelin because its manifestation is entirely sonic. There is a point in your life when you hear songs like The Ocean and Out on the Tiles and Kashmir, and you suddenly find yourself feeling like these songs are actively making you into the person you want to be. It does not matter if you've heard those songs 100 times and felt nothing in the past, and it does not matter if you don't normally like rock and roll and just happen to overhear it in somebody else's dorm room. We are all at the same vortex. For whatever reason, there is a point in the male maturation process when the music of Led Zeppelin sounds like the perfect actualization of the perfectly cool you." And then he goes on to say, "This is your Zeppelin phase, and it has as much to do with your own personal psychology as it does the way John Paul Jones played the organ on Trampled Underfoot. It has to do with sociobiology and with Aleister Crowley and possibly with mastodons. And you will grow out of it, probably. But this is why Led Zeppelin is the most beloved rock and roll band of all time, even though most people, including myself, think the Beatles and the Stones are better. Those two bands are appreciated in more myriad ways and for more myriad reasons, and the criteria for doing so changes with every generation. But Led Zeppelin is loved only one way, and that will never evolve. They are the one thing all young men share, and we will share it forever."
Granted, that was pretty masturbatory, but like that aside, that was some great word art. I was like, oh, I could feel every bit of those words reflecting at a point in my life.
It was also written in like 2003, so I think if he wrote it now, it might not have been the same. But
yeah, so it was quaint back then.
But now that we've rambled on enough,
God.
Who wants to go next?
I feel like I'm always going last. I want to go now.
All right, Tyler, what you got?
This week I chose Performance by Modern Nature.
There's never been such a blue all warm worlds around you. All warm worlds around you. And the mountain breaks for heaven. And cast God into weapons.
So this is the new album from Modern Nature. the album Island of Noise is based on the play The Tempest by Shakespeare, and so it's about a crew getting shipwrecked on this sort of magical island and sort of like their experiences and stuff like that. And so a lot of the imagery in the song and throughout this album is sort of based on that story. And so it all feels very poetic and feels very evocative, very fun to listen to. And so like I feel like without kind of knowing like where it's all coming from, you're like, well, what's the story here? It feels sort of very disjointed, very disconnected. But yeah, so Modern Nature is sort of a mix between indie, like alt rock, folk, and free jazz. And so if you are a fan of, like, we had talked about Tim Buckley like a few like months back, you know, he was one of the songs I had picked, and I feel like this sort of fits right in with this sort of style, this sort of lineage of sort of really long passages that sort of just kind of chill in the place. They just sort of hang out but have like clear like influences from jazz, and they're just sort of like generally sort of like folky in their approach. But I think what's really fun about Modern Nature is that it has a very clear sort of like contemporary lens of it. I feel like the vocal delivery is very, very modern, very contemporary, and I feel like sort of like the sort of amalgamation of sounds that are kind of going on all feel very modern. So it feels like it's a real like sort of revitalization of the sort of the sound that I've kind of been digging into lately. But all that being said, so performance. I think what really captivated me specifically about this song is that it is sort of has the same guitar riff that sort of like plays throughout the whole song, and I feel like that really grounds it in a place. I feel like it really kind of like gives you like an anchor, because there's a lot of kind of other things kind of happening. You know, like the it's not like a very consistent song structure in that, you know, there is a chorus, but it's very spread out. It's very long form. I feel like that sort of that one continuous like guitar line really sort of like brings you back in, and that sort of like repetition has always like sort of like scratched that itch in my brain that I really enjoy. But yeah, I feel like this song and this album as a whole excites me when I'm driving a long distance, because it's not exactly something that really demands your attention. It's something that just kind of like happens, and if you happen upon it, you're probably not going to think too much about it. But I feel like if you really sort of like listen to all the things that are kind of happening, like there's lots of kind of stuff going on under the hood. There's all sorts of like small performances kind of happening. There's just a saxophone that's just sort of like riffing in the background that sort of like adds a lot of like a little bit of sonic texture to it. And so I feel like when I'm going on a big long drive, you know, like I'm trying to think about stuff, you know, I'm trying to solve a problem, and I feel like this song sort of like opens my mind up to those possibilities, and really just kind of gives me something to reflect on. I think its sparseness invites you to investigate the song itself, and also to investigate kind of what's going on in your mind.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go first? I'll go.
Folks at home, this is about to be a roast.
Go ahead.
So I actually thought this was a wonderful song for open road driving. I like that it has so many different instruments going on. It, in some ways, it feels a little amateurish, if that makes sense. And I'm not talking about everybody. I mean,
I think that's intentional, though.
yeah, and that's what I mean. I feel like it's supposed to be like that, but not all of it is amateurish. It's really the guitar solos and stuff; those feel amateur-y. But the sax line,
But in a very like calculated way.
yeah, it's definitely they can play. It's
Like in the way that the White Stripes sound amateurish.
right.
Like it's part of the aesthetic.
Right. Like, I get I hesitate to call this jazzy as much as I feel it's like improvised. It has a more like amateur improvised, and that's what I think makes this song good and interesting, right? Is because it definitely goes someplace, but doesn't really go anyplace, if that makes sense. I'm talking in contradictions tonight, apparently, about this song.
No, that's okay.
I said a trumpet and a saxophone in a song was a good song.
Yeah, exactly. I knew I was really rocking the boat. But I will say that sort of like free jazz is like what sort of like they were like is what the method they were using for like a lot of the improvisation, which is basically what that means. It's basically they are like improving like a structured improv, more or less. So I think you're right in that you're like, it doesn't feel super polished. That's probably what you're thinking of. It doesn't feel like there's like a this is fully intentional.
So I'm gonna get very grad school for a second. They posted a visualizer with this song, And I didn't look at it the first 4 times that I listened to the song. But there was something about the song that just felt really unsettled to me. Like it made me like mildly uncomfortable, which is not a feeling I want to have when I'm driving. Like it simultaneously felt like I might fall asleep at the wheel, but also like I might be like tensing up on the steering wheel. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And then I watched this visualizer, and I want you to stick with me as I go through a very bad grad school seminar moment with you. Sean will remember talking about semiotics in grad school. Tyler, do you know what semiotics are? Okay, so semiotics is the study of signs and symbols. It's often used in combination with like psychoanalysis or Marxist theory. And basically, the best way to think about this is like the word dog is a signifier, right? It doesn't actually mean anything on its own. It signifies dog. An actual dog is the thing being signified by the signifier, the word dog. The combination of those two things is a sign. And the only way signs work is if one of the two elements are in some way like grounded in reality. And so this is often called grounding. The thing that bothers me about this song, and I see it in this visualizer, like it's clearly film theoretically what they're trying to do here, is they're messing with your idea of where the ground is. So when you watch the visualizer, they'll show like a hole in a rock and intercut it with a gateway that's exactly the same shape. And once they've done that a few times, then it's the gateway and a box that's the same shape as the gateway. And they intercut those things. And then they move on to a path versus the box. And like the shapes are the same, but the connection between this thing and the thing before it, totally different, right? And I think that's what this song is trying to do. It's trying to like play with your sense of ground. Like, where is the base of this song? Is it that repetitive rhythm guitar? Is it the trumpet? Is it the vocal? Like, none of them are really doing anything predictable, because even the thing that you think is the most repetitive, like that rhythm guitar, it kind of fades in and out, and it like doesn't always serve the same purpose. And I think that's what like makes it so discomforting to me. I'm like, oh, like what is going on here? Like every 30 seconds or so, there's just a different approach to the same like simple set of instruments. And theoretically, I like that. Like as an art concept, I love it. I would worry about listening to this while driving a car, because to me, it's a little too like trancy and a little too smart. Like I don't want to get into a meditative state where I'm like not focusing on the road. And that's kind of how I felt listening to this on my commute home tonight. I was like, this feels like I need to be like staring at my ceiling going on an emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate what they're doing here. I don't know that it's right for this challenge.
Sure.
And that was probably the most obnoxiously pretentious way for me to say that.
I mean, that was actually really good. I feel like that's sort of like our relationship anyway, in that I feel like I'm like going wide on like things. I'm like, here's a thing that I find interesting. And Taylor's like, okay, I'm going to actually like consume the thing like a lot and then like tell you like what's going on with it. I'm like, oh, okay. I just thought it sounded neat. But I feel like probably at the core there, I probably understood kind of what you were saying, and that it's like, yeah, there's the fact that things keep changing and keep shifting subtly is like is igniting my brain rather than I feel like putting you more in a trance. I'm like almost thinking more about it and like able to like focus in, because it's almost like I feel like my brain is in a bunch of different directions, and just listening to the song going in different directions focuses me in to focus on the road.
Yeah, our approach to detail is very different. How's it going, Sean?
I think you summed it up nicely. The trance part doesn't really bother me that much.
Sure.
And we'll get to that when we get to mine, but
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, Sean, you're last man standing. What's your song this week?
so finally, best for last. The song is I Don't Recognize You by New Dad.
This generation, it's the missing
Trudad is a rock band from Ireland that I recently discovered on Spotify. And I've been really into their very 90s-esque weeble wobble music. And I thought this was a really good example of what an Open Road song for me is, because it is trancy. That's how I feel about it when it comes to Open Road, is that you can kind of let yourself go a little bit. Not like crazy, but you kind of like wander off in your own thoughts because driving becomes like a secondary thing. It's like telling yourself to breathe. You don't really have to do that. You kind of just function already there. You're kind of in your own head. And I thought this was a really good it was a good track for that. Especially in the contemplative places that I go when I'm open road driving or doing something in a long journey. I feel like I spend a lot of time looking inward, kind of in a meditative state, and just letting the things kind of come up as they come and letting them pass. Very Zazen-esque. And I think that's why I liked it, because I felt like sometimes when I do this, I ask myself, I come out of it thinking like, who am I? Like, oh, that was a weird thought. Like, it just raises a bunch of this subconscious stuff. So I don't really want to say that I purely picked the song because of the title. I think it works well on a bunch of different like scenarios, because I like the ambient guitar and kind of just the soft chorus and the soft verse and the aggressive chorus. But yeah, I figured you guys would like this too. It's just felt like a natural fit.
Yeah, it's really hard to place what bands this sounds like, because it kind of sounds like Hole or Garbage, and it kind of sounds like shoegazy stuff, like, you know, your My Bloody Valentines and that kind of stuff, but then it's also got like a little bit of Smashing Pumpkins in the like melodic heavy chorus structure. It's just a really good synthesis of like late 90s, early 2000s alt rock. And I think there's something really alluring about that sound in a way that it's like culturally familiar for us, but this song is a new song in an old sound, which I think fits the challenge really well. It's like familiar, but still kind of foreign. And her voice is kind of dreamy. She reminds me of, I can't think of her name, but the lead vocalist from Beach House, like very dream poppy. It definitely, like, it's contemplative, but it's still got some motion to it and some aggression to it in the distorted guitars that I think would keep me awake behind the wheel, keep me like alert enough to drive, but like you said, kind of like in my own head enough to not think too hard about driving.
Chronologically, so after we kind of got through this sort of like 90s-ish kind of phase, what was the major sort of like rock movement after that? Was it kind of like the emo stuff, kind of like early 2000s emo?
I mean, it depends on if you consider like Strokes, Hives, White Stripes, Black Keys to be separate from this. Because I would argue that like the post-grunge alt-rock world was going either industrial with your Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Mansons, or psychedelic with your like Smashing Pumpkins, Black Crowes, etc. And then the garage rock bands in New York and Detroit really came in and were just like, nope, dumb, easy songs, played fast, like, and then we got emo.
So there was, that's sort of like the age of digitalization and more people getting access to tools, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so there wasn't like a clear like movement, kind of like, I feel like that was kind of when the 90s were sort of like one, sort of like an end of the singular strain of genre, maybe. It's wait, that's a real audacious claim to make. Please don't at me. Anyway, I guess all I have to say is, I'm thinking about this is like, why does like something like this, which has like, it feels authentic, even though it's clearly borrowing from another time, another era, whereas like, I feel like sometimes like a Greta Van Fleet is like, you are clearly ripping off Led Zeppelin. But like, is it probably like the reason why is because it feels almost like in that situation it's more of like a mimicry, like we're trying to sound as close as we can to that sound in particular, whereas this feels like it's distinctly their own. No one's trying to sound like anyone else. They're just sort of using the sounds and the tools to sort of create new songs sort of in the genre. And so that's sort of like it.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the other part too is like, if you're gonna come at the king, don't miss. Like, it's a lot harder to come at Led Zeppelin, or like last week with Foxy Shazam, to come at Queen. because everybody knows what those bands sound like. Whereas it's conceivable that like a teenager in the UK is not as familiar with 90s indie and alt rock, and they may hear New Dad and then be like, oh cool, now I'm gonna go listen to My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah. And that feels like the kind of a nice way to do it, right? Because I will say that like New Dad doesn't necessarily feel, you know, like I feel like this is sort of like the way, like we're calling this bubble grunge, I guess, at this point.
I hate that name so much.
But you're like, you put it next to like a soccer mommy, and you're like, okay, this fits. And you know, I feel like there's been lots of people sort of like experimenting with that sound in it, and I just think it's nice. I don't necessarily think that like, what am I trying to say? Like, I feel like in some ways we didn't necessarily get blown out by this genre. Like, I feel like it didn't like get so big, so meteoric that like we just got tired of it and then like it just sort of died. You know, like I feel like it was like a thing and then just sort of like faded into the background a bit. But I'm also talking about like, we're talking about like 20 different bands across varying subgenres. I don't know. I guess what I'm mean to say is that I feel like this is just, I'm really enjoying this sort of like garage. I'm just gonna call it bubble grunge. I like how it's. I feel like it borrows from the past, but I feel like it's still able to forge its own future, and I think that's just really nice. And yes, I feel like in regards to the challenge, I feel like Sean and I are in a similar wavelength. That I feel like this also resonates with me in this way. I would probably listen to this album, and we probably would enjoy it on a nice long drive, because I do feel like I don't need something to demand too much of my time necessarily, like my mental space. You know, I feel like this is just chill enough. You know, it kind of lets me, it feels a little melancholy, so it kind of makes you feel a little reflective, makes you kind of think about what's going on in my life a little bit. So it's nice in that way. And I feel like, you know, I don't feel like this is like the most unique, but I like it and it sounds good, and I feel like it's good. I'm into it.
Some listener suggestions this week. Thank you everybody for writing in. I appreciate it. And now I'm going to start to read them off. So Tess Stevens, thank you, Tess. Actually, she's been a guest of the show. Awesome. Her pick this week was Runaways by the Killers. Awesome song.
Ooh, Killer's a good choice.
As soon as she put it in, I wanted to pick it.
Yeah. Coulda, shoulda, woulda, Taylor. Coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Do we got a Killers on here?
We have a few Killers on here.
Okay, sorry. We at least got Sam Sound, right?
So Ivan Glasgow, he picked Radar Love by Golden Earring. He also left us a nice comment, and it said, it makes me want to hit the road and put the hammer down to see how fast I can go. He said, I don't anymore because I am old and I don't want speeding tickets, but I want to do so. I appreciate that. I feel like Radar Love's definitely a good song to
little PSA there for folks out there.
So Jack, he picked Dimension by Wolfmother. Oh god, these are all pedal to the metal songs. This is like, see, I feel like once again,
Dimension already on the playlist though.
We missed the listeners always seem to have a different conception of what the challenge is than what we actually pick. This is funny.
I went pedal to the metal. You guys were like, I want to be pensive and at peace with my inner self. And I'm like, nah, man, Zeppelin all the way, baby. Turn it up to 11.
It didn't say pedal to the floor driving.
He's got a
Somebody said, if you want pedal to the metal driving, let's go ahead and submit that as a challenge. We'll take it. So that way we can all get our rev on and get a speed ticket.
Well, I'm just saying, Sean already wasted Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins, so
it's fine. Don't need it.
Taylor gets into his car every morning and does the speech that Brock Sampson does before they go out and kill the guild for the Monarch's wedding. He's like, today you are murder flies. That's kind of like, that's where he was going with that one.
Yeah, that's what you need to do to commute in Atlanta traffic.
Yeah. And then finally, last but not least, Daniel Whitford, Trucker's Atlas by Modest Mouse. I am not that familiar with this song.
It's a great track.
But I want to imagine that if Daniel put it on here, that's pretty damn good.
It's a great track.
Is it from the first album?
I think so.
Long Road with somebody with nothing to think about? No.
Yeah, I think it is on that one.
It's probably pretty good.
And with that, it's time for our B-sides. You got them. People might want to hear them. Go ahead. Pedal to the metal.
I wanted to pick both of these songs, but I would feel bad because we would spend the rest of the episode doing terrible impressions. Spoon Man by Soundgarden.
Good choice.
I had to do it to him. Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon.
I'm sorry. So sorry, Taylor. I'm sorry.
Revisit that song. Now that it's not overplayed by radio, it's a pretty great song.
Okay, I believe you.
Also one that you can do a terrible impression of really easily.
This week, The Mighty Bureau Grand by This Will Destroy You. A post-rock monolith that I thought about submitting, but I decided, 11 minutes, 16 seconds might not be the play this time. Storm Queen by Grace Cummings. Hoedown, which is a cover, a beautiful electronic cover by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I wanted some Americana. I want a little bit of that American spirit, but with a synthesizer. And Body in the Mirror by Sungaze, which is a local band I really like a lot. You should all listen to.
All right. Well, this week I got two. My first, and these are to Taylor's point. My pedal to the metal songs. Running Down the Dream by Tom Petty. That's a Getting in Trouble on the Road song. And
Yeah, that's a heater.
And then my other, probably more modern take is Virgins by Death from Above 1979. Just think that's I've been really rocking out to, man, what is that? It's like blanking on me. It Frees Me. That's not what it is. That album, the White Album from Death from Above 1979. God, such a good Ride Your Bike record.
Well, Tyler, if people want to ride shotgun with you, where can they do that?
Hey everybody, you can find my design and illustration work at rootpets.club, and as always, you can find me on the socials as Root Pets Club on Instagram and Twitter.
Sean, if people want to catch you at a roadside attraction, where can they see you?
Someone just rolls up next to me, rolls down the window. Hey, big boy. It's thanks for painting that picture for me. But tell me, Sean, Instagram. That's where you can find me.
And if you want to put the pedal to the metal with me, you can find me at TC Olmstead. If you want to chip in some gas money to help us support the show, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/NoRepeatPod, where you get a bonus show every month. But until then, we'll be back next week with another episode of No Repeat.